be informative. In a moment, I'll turn the floor over to Congressman Garamendi for some opening remarks. But first, I want to explain the format for tonight's town hall. Participants have been asked to pre-submit questions ahead of the event to ensure we can get to as many of your questions as possible. However, if you did not pre-submit a question, you may still ask one using the Q&A feature here on Zoom. We hope to get to as many of your questions as possible during this call, so we ask participants to limit their questions to one each. Tonight's event is taking place after the House of Representatives vote today to impeach President Donald Trump. While we expect many questions pertaining to this subject, the Congressman will be happy to answer questions related to different issues as well. Due to the high volume of questions, we won't be able to get to all of them over the next hour. However, you can visit our website at garamendi.house.gov and follow the Contact Me section to ask any outstanding questions you may have. Our office will respond to you as quickly as possible. You can also stay up to date with Congressman Garamendi by visiting his Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages, all under the handle @RepGaramendi. Finally, you can sign up for Congressman Garamendi's newsletter through his website at garamendi.house.gov. Now, here's Congressman Garamendi.
Eric, thank you so very much. And for all of you that have joined us this evening, thank you for taking the time. A lot of things going on in Washington, a lot of things going on in California, many, many things to talk about. And obviously there's this overriding concern about the pandemic. That's not really the subject of tonight because of what's happened here in Washington, D.C., but it's certainly on all of our minds. This virtual town hall is where we are in the age of COVID. I would much prefer to be there in your communities, whether that's up in, I don't know, let's say Lake County or over in Marysville, Yuba City, wherever it happens to be, even Davis and down into Solano County. But we're not. We're all sheltering in place as best we can. For those of us in Congress, well, we've got to travel back and forth across the nation. And so, yeah, it's airplanes and airports and all the concerns that go with that. Fortunately, we are able to get our vaccinations. And if we could ever get rid of the Trump administration in 7 more days, we'll get a decent rollout of the vaccination programs. But right now, we are where we are. So here we go with a virtual town hall. I understand we have more than 1,000 folks on the phone. Obviously not going to get 1,000 questions, but the staff has worked over the last few hours to try to put together an array of questions that you have brought to us. So where shall I start? Well, let's start with the vote in the House of Representatives today, 1 week after a presidential incited coup against the government of America. That's right, that's exactly what it was. President Trump, for the last month and a half to almost 2 months, invited his supporters, particularly those who wanted to march on Washington, D.C., to come to Washington, D.C. on the very same day that the Congress would finalize the 2020 election with the certification of the Electoral College votes. About the time we started working on that in the Capitol, Trump started working on riling up his 40,000 supporters that arrived in Washington. And Trump, together with a couple of members of Congress and Rudy Giuliani and Don Jr., riled up that crowd, put a lot of heat into them, and then the president said, let's march down Pennsylvania Avenue, and he incited an insurrection. That insurrection turned extraordinarily violent. You've seen the videos. That day, we didn't know how violent it was. I do know that perhaps 100 of my colleagues who were in the chamber at that time were traumatized by the violence. And even to this day, they have trouble talking about that trauma. You've watched the videos, as have I, and we've learned as more and more videos come out how just violent, aggressive, and organized this attack was. This attack came from the east side and the west side of the Capitol simultaneously. This wasn't something that just happened. This was a planned insurrection. So a week after it happened, actually days after it happened, many of us, myself included, the next day, called for an impeachment because it was so obvious through the videos that were then available of the Trump rally and the riot and the mob at the United States Capitol, the symbol of our democracy all around the world. Nonetheless, we were calling for an impeachment moments after that insurrection took place. And it came to fruition this afternoon, about 4 o'clock this afternoon, with an overwhelming vote with 10 Republicans joining all the Democrats to impeach Donald John Trump for the second time in his administration. It'll now go over to the Senate. It's not clear when that trial will take place. Keep in mind that an impeachment is pretty much like, not pretty much, it is in fact similar to a grand jury indictment. It is an indictment, the charges. The Senate is the trier of the facts. In this case, the facts are out there in plain sight. The rioters responded to Trump's message. The rioters responded to the message of at least 3 members of Congress, one of whom said, "Go up there and kick ass." My guess is that the ass that will be kicked is his out of the Congress when this is all said and done. But the result of all of that is the impeachment that was voted on today. We'll see where it goes from here. I suspect that this impeachment will be taken up perhaps before the inaugural. There's going to be incredible pressure on the US Senate to get this up before the inaugural. If it's not before the inaugural and Trump is no longer in office, he will still be held to a trial. He can't pardon himself, not from this anyway, and he cannot be pardoned. This impeachment trial will go forward in the Senate, either before the inaugural or after. And among the elements of the impeachment is that should he be found guilty, which he certainly should, he will be barred from public office forever. He will not have a Secret Service detail. He will not have a pension. He will not have $1 million a year travel budget. Now, that's not the real purpose of all of this. The real purpose of all of this is to make it clear to Trump and to any other demagogue that may come into the office of the presidency that there is a price to pay, that you cannot usurp the power of the Congress. You cannot engage in a coup. You cannot engage in an insurrection without there being some penalty. In this case, the most immediate penalty is the impeachment. So with that, perhaps, Eric, we can go to questions. I suspect we'll probably pick up the pandemic somewhere along in the evening.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Our first question comes from Dawn in Clear Lake. Their question is, with President-elect Biden's inauguration on the 20th, just a few short days away, why are House Democrats pressing for President Trump's impeachment right now?
I covered that just a moment ago, but let me drive this point home. The President of the United States instigated a coup, planned it, brought his people to the Capitol on the very same day that the election was to be certified, and then he and others incited a riot, incited a mob, and turned them loose on the Congress of the United States for the purpose of stopping the certification process, for the purpose of stopping the election. And the next step would be probably calling martial law, because there really was a serious riot underway. The Capitol had been stormed. People had been injured. One police officer was seriously injured, died later. And 2 other people had died of some incident related to their own health. With martial law in place, you could then control the government indefinitely into the future. Push the election aside, and then perhaps hold another fake election, a real fake election this time. Keep in mind, the American election was the most secure, the least fraud ever in American history, and the most Americans ever in the history of this nation voting. Now, a lot of them voted for Trump. More voted for Biden. Biden won this thing fair and square. More than 60 lawsuits were put forth by the Trump supporters, by the Trump campaign, and others who were connected to the Trump organization at the state level, national level. Not one of those was found to have merit. And so we move forward. Why the impeachment? It is to secure our democracy, to make it clear that there can never be a president who goes untouched after instigating an insurrection for the purpose of a coup and maintaining his own power as president. That's what this is about. Now, if the Senate finds him guilty, then we've taken the second step, the impeachment being the indictment, the charges, the trial in the Senate. I would hope the Senate, Democrats and Republicans alike, and there's some indication that Republican senators are moving to vote for a guilty verdict. That is to sustain the impeachment. So that's why we did it. Will Trump be out of office when all this is completed? Probably, although that might change with enough pressure on Mitch McConnell to hold the trial later this week or over the weekend.
Great. Our next question comes from Janine in Fairfield. Question is, can the Department of Justice investigate President Trump for the events on January 6th? Can they possibly convict him at the Department of Justice? Janine also adds that she thinks impeachment was necessary.
Janine, thank you. It's a good question. And there are about 535 or 33 members of Congress and the Senate that are pondering that same question. It appears as though the answer is up to the next Attorney General. Biden has been very clear. He is not going to instruct the next Attorney General one way or the other. There will certainly be an investigation of the riot, of the mob. There's already investigations underway about the potential coordination with someone in the Trump organization. We don't know where or how, but that investigation is underway. There's an investigation underway about the potential involvement of members of Congress or their staff. And there's a serious investigations underway about coordination amongst the various groups that did come to Washington. All of those investigations will go forward. Will they lead to charges? Follow the facts. That's what President-elect Biden has said. The Justice Department is expected to follow the facts here. If those facts lead back to the specific involvement in a conspiracy by members of the Trump organization or family, or the president himself, yes, there could be and probably would be charges. But at that time, the President Trump is no longer president.
Thank you, sir. The next question comes from Tanya in Vacaville. Question is, why is impeachment of President Trump being initiated in the first place? On what grounds is it being initiated? How was the 25th Amendment appropriate in this case before impeachment?
Excellent question, Tanya. Let's go to the 25th Amendment. It is relatively new. It is has been used multiple times when the president, for usually health reasons, is temporarily disabled, often called the colonoscopy amendment. Has been used numerous times there when the president's under some anesthetic. However, it does also allow the vice president, with a majority of the cabinet, to declare the president incapable of performing his duties. It doesn't specify what incapable means. It could mean crazy, unhinged, irrational, not sound, or just dead drunk all the time. It could be any of those mental or physical reasons that would allow the vice president to open that process. Clearly, we wanted the vice president to take that step. That was the first thing the Democrats wanted to do, and that is to have Vice President Pence enact the 21st Amendment, find the president incapable of performing his duties. And I would say there's plenty of evidence that he was incapable of performing his duties. He certainly was not protecting the institution of the government, and he certainly was inciting a riot. So there's evidence that he was incapable or unwilling to perform his duties. Vice President Pence this morning made it clear that he would not use Section 4 of the 25th Amendment, which would give him the power, which gives him the power to do that. He waved that off. That then caused us to take the step we did today, which is the only other avenue available to the Congress at this time, which is the impeachment process. You had a first part of your question, which I think I just skipped over here. Eric, what was the first part of your question?
The first part is, why was the impeachment article, why were they initiated? On what grounds?
Well, I think I've covered that, but the grounds are all related to the January 6th rally that the president fomented, and then the ensuing incitement to that rally to storm the Capitol, to stop the election process. Those are the fundamental charges. It also, in the document, does reference the Georgia effort by the president to force the Georgia Secretary of State to find 11,780 votes. That will probably be the Jeopardy question of the future, or the answer to the Jeopardy question. So that is where it is. We will have up on our website the actual impeachment document. It's only 3 pages with enough whereases to set the stage, and then the indictment itself. And I would urge any and all of you to go to our website. Eric will, and Sophia, who actually is our conductor for this evening, manning the screen, she will put that resolution up for any of you to read, and you'll see it's straightforward, very powerful, and all the elements necessary for the Senate to take up a trial are presented.
Thank you, sir. The next question we have comes from Rio in Vacaville. Question is, does the federal government have any involvement, aside from providing COVID-19 vaccines, in accelerating the administration of vaccines to the general population?
We're talking about a monumental screw up here of tragic proportions. This problem actually began very early in the pandemic. Back in February, March, the Trump administration made a fundamental policy decision that has caused the death of thousands or tens of thousands or maybe even a couple 100,000 Americans. And that decision was that this pandemic was to be handled at the local and state level, and the federal government would not take control of the effort to address the pandemic. The result of that decision has played out in tragic ways over the last 10 months. It's almost 12 months now, isn't it? 11 and a half months. Confusion, not knowing what to do, not knowing where the supplies are, never really invoking the Defense Production Act, which would allow the federal government to bring into the fight the entire power of the American economy and to organize it in such a way as to provide protective equipment, the PPEs, to provide the necessary organizational structures, the dissemination of information, and also President Trump made a decision that he wanted to keep the economy going even though the pandemic was growing. The result of that decision was messages from him and his administration that the most important thing was to keep the economy going, not to dampen the economy with masks or stay at home or other restrictions, shutting down businesses, limiting where people could gather. That was his decision. That played out in his rhetoric, in his speeches in the month of March and April when he was conducting those daily briefings. The result of that was the virus was able to get out of control. And by midsummer, we had a horrible spike in infections following the Memorial Day and the July 4th holidays. And then, as expected, that spike diminished, and we knew that we would be in for a serious, serious outbreak in the fall. And indeed, we did have a serious outbreak. And now it is outbreak upon outbreak, surge upon surge. Those of you that want to do some simple math, we talk about why is there so many deaths now? It's because the infected population is so great. We had, back in the early days, the infected population was very small, yet the death rate was about the same then as it is today. But you take a death rate of 1.5%, maybe 2%, and you apply it to a very large base, you get a lot of people dying, and that's where we are today. And with a very large infected population as we have today, the virus has a lot of places to live. And it's searching for a new place to live. And that new place is you, it's your neighbor, it's your mother, it's another individual, it's another human being. So that virus wants someone to be its new home. That's where we are. Where do we go from here? Let me just toss out one positive thing here. The Trump administration did Operation Warp Speed, and credit where it's due. They were able to marshal the resources to support, with billions upon billions of dollars, the pharmaceutical industry to use modern genetic technologies to short circuit, reduce the time in the development of a virus, of a vaccine for this virus. Good, that happened. I will note that one of the vaccines, the most popular one, did not get federal support, the Pfizer. They chose to do it on their own, and Moderna, the other vaccine that is now in place, did get money in the billions to do its vaccination. Good for them. There are probably 2 or 3 additional vaccines that will be approved in the next month to 2 months. Now, I'm going to go forward here. In 7 days, we're going to have a new president. He has pledged a very difficult task for his administration, and that is to do 100 vaccinations in the next 100 days or 107 days. He's starting from a very disorganized situation, and he'll have to use the power of the federal government to set up clarity and to push out into the communities the program. I have been in touch with the Biden administration because of my work on the Armed Services Committee to encourage them to use the military. Once this inaugural's over and the current threat is over, or at least reduced, I would like to see our military turned full on. All the National Guard, all the soldiers that are at the various bases around the United States, being the troops in the stadiums, on the bases, in the communities, in the high schools, trained and doing the vaccinations. We should have enough vaccine. We're going to see about using the vaccine to get as many people vaccinated as possible. The second dose will come along later. Those things are all in play. Hopefully the new administration will use the power of the federal government, including the Defense Production Act and the military, to organize this nation so that we can get the vaccinations done. 100 million in 100 days.
Our next question comes from the live Q&A portion of our Zoom discussion. It comes from Cindy. Cindy asks, how are you going to heal political divisions in your district and in this nation?
I'm sorry, how am I going to
heal political divisions within the district that you represent and in the nation?
I think there are three answers to this question, and I must tell you, I've been asked this several times in the last couple of days on various media outlets. First of all, we'll have a new president who has pledged to heal, not divide. President Trump started his campaign by dividing the nation. You remember the golden escalator and taking on the Hispanic minorities in America. And he continued that divisive strategy throughout his 4 years. He will not be president. He may not have a Twitter or a Parler or any other account for which to continue to rile and pump up his base. And so that might help. The other thing is, if he does more of what he did this morning, it would be extremely helpful. This morning in what was a message, a videotape message, he said, cool it, stop the violence. Not a direct quote, but close is, people that are my true supporters don't engage in violence. Good. If he continues to do that, that'll bring a lot of the temperature down. And if Biden continues to maintain his pledge, he will do it. As for me, I've always tried to seek the middle ground. My entire career has been to find compromises, and I've been rather successful at it in the California legislature as lieutenant governor, insurance commissioner, and here in Washington. And so the process of compromise is in my DNA, it's in my life's work. And so that's where I'm going, working with Annie and everybody in the district that wants to address whatever the problems happen to be. And so we'll continue doing that. I would expect if Trump continues to reduce his rhetoric as he did this morning, and Biden continues his path, it'll be easier for the members of Congress and the Senate to deal with it. Do keep in mind that we still will have this impeachment thing for probably a month more, and whatever fallout may come from that. But I think we're on our way to a very different 4 years ahead of us, and I'll do my part in trying to heal, to calm, and to reduce the tensions.
Our next question also comes from the live Q&A section. It's from Lindy. Lindy asks, where do we go from here? How do we prevent something like this insurrection from January 6th from happening again? Lindy suggests creating more stringent requirements for running for president and putting certain regulations in place on broadcasts and social media, requiring adherence to the truth.
There are several different pieces of legislation that were enacted, that were introduced last year and passed by the House of Representatives, but did not pass the Senate. There's a major voting rights bill that we worked on. It did pass the House. It included a variety of measures support for state and local government, the way in which elections, at least at the federal level, were to be conducted. All of those were in that legislation. Also, we clearly have to deal with money in politics. Citizens United decision by the Supreme Court opened the floodgates to dark money, secret money, not just a few dollars, but hundreds of millions of dollars that is secret, that we don't know where it came from. We see the effect of it. That has to be dealt with, and there are different ways that we can revise the limitations on contributions. There are other areas that will need attention with regard to voting. There's one thing that has actually happened in about 40% of the electoral states, that is states with electoral votes, and that is called national popular election. And what it is a compact by the states to vote their electors based upon the national popular vote. I'm sure all of us watched this election more closely than we had in the past. You'll note that Maine splits its electors based upon congressional districts. One of the Midwest states, Nebraska, I think it is, also does the same. So it is possible for the states to determine how their electors vote. Don't need to change the Constitution. You simply change the state law so that the state law says the electors for California will vote for the candidate that has the largest popular national vote. That puts the Electoral College aside and puts us in place with a national popular vote. I am all in on this, have been all in on this for more than a decade now. We need about another handful of states. A couple of big states, Virginia perhaps will come along, and a couple of more states, and we will have a national popular vote for the next election. So these are things that are in play. Watch closely, keep in touch with our websites, with our social media, and you'll see this play out in great detail in the weeks and months, near term, in the next 6 months.
Thank you, sir. And just a reminder, as the Congressman mentioned, all of his social media accounts are reachable under the handle @Rep Garamendi. His website is garamendi.house.gov. Our next question comes from Michael in Vacaville. Michael asks, do you have a plan to address lack of funding in the areas of education or infrastructure?
Well, excellent question. Yes, there are two very different plans underway here. First of all, we attempted, beginning in the late spring, in April, May, to put forward the fourth emergency COVID legislation. It was a $3 trillion piece of legislation, and it provided a very substantial amount of money for education, for local governments, for state governments, for transportation, transit, and the like. It also had multiple other things dealing with the COVID, money for testing, tracing, vaccinations, and on and on. That died in the Senate. In the fall, in September, we passed a $2 trillion bill that did the same, but for a shorter period of time. And finally, in December, we passed a $900+ billion bill, less than $1 trillion, that again did pretty much the same, but not enough money to deal with it. Biden has been very clear. One of our very first tasks, and here's where the impeachment gets in the way with the first tasks, is to provide money to crush the virus, to provide money for education so that testing programs, so that schools can be open safely, money for state and local governments where it is needed, and also a substantial amount of money for the vaccination programs, and to support small businesses. Also, $2,000 per person and money for unemployment insurance, supplemental unemployment insurance. Those will be in a piece of legislation that will be introduced in the afternoon of January 20th. There are not going to be big parties in Washington on inaugural day. It'll be a work day. And so that afternoon and the following morning, major pieces of legislation to carry out the Biden agenda will be introduced. In addition to the COVID relief, there will be a infrastructure bill that will probably be introduced in the next 3 to 4 weeks out there. It will be similar to what we passed out of the House of Representatives in September. It will carry out the Biden campaign promise of major infrastructure investment across all kinds of infrastructure. For me, in my district, one of the things we were able to put into the previous bill, and Biden carried that forward in his proposals, is rural broadband. Nothing drives me more crazy than the fact that perhaps a third of the people in my district cannot get good internet connection. And so there's $250 million in the existing bill that we passed in December for rural broadband, and there'll be a lot more in the next legislation. That's one example of infrastructure. But you think of infrastructure, sanitation, water systems, transit systems, roads, levees, harbors, goes on and on. And that'll be a major push. And I would suspect that now that the House is in the hands of the Democrats and the Senate and the presidency, that the major infrastructure bill will be passed by midsummer.
Our next question comes from the live Q&A from Jason. Jason asks, what do you have to say to the near half of the country who feel like they're being marginalized and lack confidence in the results of the presidential election?
Actually, they're not marginalized at all. Every election, we work fervently for our candidate. And in the past elections, 4 years ago, actually more than half of the American voters voted for the loser. Hillary Clinton had 3 million more votes nationally than Donald Trump, but she lost the election in the Electoral College. This time around, 8 million, nearly 8 million more Americans voted for Biden. The turnout for both Biden and for Trump was the largest ever. And so 74 million Americans voted for Trump. And this is the nature of an election. They're not marginalized. They are, in fact, part of the American fabric. And they're the teachers, they're the scientists, they are the truck drivers, they're the husband at home while the wife is working, they're the unemployed, they are the employed, just like those who voted for Biden on that side. And so what we're going to do is to put together legislation for all Americans, particularly those in the middle to low incomes. That's where the focus will be. In the legislation last spring, the second major COVID legislation was drafted by the Senate Republicans. Most of that money went to the top end of the income earners, major corporations, major income earners, and the like. We think that was incorrect. The next legislation went to small businesses or smaller businesses. And in the days ahead, I will guarantee you that the focus will be across the board for all Americans. Whether they voted for Trump or whether they voted for Biden makes no difference. They will be the small business owners. They will be the middle and lower income part of the population. I said a moment ago the kinds of legislation that will be, the kind of support that will be there in the upcoming legislation. And keep in mind that infrastructure is middle income jobs, whether those jobs are in technology or in operating a crane on a highway project.
Our next question comes from Sandy from Davis. Sandy wants to know if all U.S. state capitals will have increased security on Inauguration Day, particularly Sacramento, near the district.
One of my tasks as a senior member of the House Armed Services Committee is to be the chairman of the Readiness Subcommittee that oversees the National Guard units around the nation. I had a conversation this afternoon with the Vice Commander of the National Guard Bureau. The conversation was about security for the inaugural and also about capitals and governments around the nation. At this moment, the governors around the nation are aware of the potential threats. That information is coming from the FBI. Unfortunately, the administration of the Department of Homeland Security is in chaos. Resignations, acting, people that don't know what they're doing. So we have a very serious vacuum in the principal department with overall responsibility for Homeland Security. And so the governors, as I understand it, are having trouble getting the information they need, but they know there's trouble coming. They are, under their laws and under the federal laws, able to call out the National Guard and to organize their state police and other police organizations to provide whatever protection is necessary. Every state has a program in which police organization, fire organizations, emergency service organizations, state and local support each other. California has a very robust, very exercised, often used mutual support organization. So I'm certain that Governor Newsom has already worked through these issues, providing the necessary protection for the Capitol and other public and probably private businesses throughout the state of California.
Our next question comes from the live Q&A from Christine. Christine would like to know, can you tell us which immediate changes you would like to see to the vaccination program so that we can start getting more people vaccinated for COVID-19?
I covered some of this. First of all, I would use the military. I've been on the Armed Services Committee for 11 years, and I will tell you the military can get it done if they're told what to do. It is an organization that responds quickly, is organized, and can work through very complex situations. I would hope that the Biden administration would do that once we get past this inaugural. Secondly, with regard to the distribution of the vaccines, I'm increasingly of the opinion, and this has not yet been settled by the medical experts, I think we ought to move aggressively to vaccinate as many people as possible with the first vaccination shot, and then scramble and force as much production as possible for the follow-up shot. There is evidence that the first shot has significant effectiveness, not complete, but probably, and again, I'm way out on the limb here, but it appears as though it may be a way to extensively and massively expand the number of people that are vaccinated. Most states, now that the federal government has loosened the restrictions, allows everybody over 65 to be next in line. It was always the first responders, medical personnel, and the like. It is now, at least at the federal level, a new order that came out, I believe, yesterday. 65 and above fall in the same category as first responders and medical personnel. I think that's good. The next issue really goes to the new vaccines that are coming online. We don't hear too much about that, but we do know that they're out there and they would be added to it. So maximize the production of vaccines. A very bad mistake was made by the Trump administration where they waived off I think 500 million doses, second round of doses, said it wasn't going to be necessary. That was in the summer. Much of that has now been recouped, but not completely. So as many vaccines as we can get, as fast as we can get them, expand the universe. And this is something that I got into quite a debate with one of the Northern California television stations was, yeah, but the bars are, people want to keep the bars open. People want to keep the restaurants open. And I'm going, let's be wise here. Let's understand that we're in the midst of a raging pandemic in California. No, it is not in Butte. It is not in Sutter. It is not in Yuba County or Lake County as much as it is in Los Angeles, but it will be. It will be. And we need to be smart. We need to be wise. We know that we can enhance our own personal safety by wearing masks. It's not a political statement. It's the smart thing to do to protect yourself, and you'll protect others at the same time. Gathering for a drink in a bar, that's just not smart. And that's why we want to make sure that we provide support for small businesses, whether it's a restaurant, which incidentally in the legislation that the Senate refused to move, there was a major section specifically for restaurants and for venues of entertainment, which could be your local bar. So we want to provide that support so these organizations, these businesses can stay and can recover. But it's time to be smart, folks. It is time to be wise. It's not a political statement. Trump is not going to be president. Biden's wearing a mask. His entire organization will be wearing a mask. Whether it becomes politically the thing to do remains to be seen, but it's certainly the smart thing to do.
Our next question comes from the live Q&A from Tanya. Tanya says, Trump's decision to continue the economy was a huge plus for people and business owners. Wasn't the COVID spread in California due to Governor Newsom's mismanagement around the state?
And a very, very, very important question. It caused me to think about those two very different issues. Keeping the economy open, that will be debated for a long time. There is substantial evidence that it backfired. That evidence is found in other countries that shut down their economy for a very short period of time, but a very, very tight shutdown, specifically to starve the virus, to give it no place to go, no new human to infect. And it seems to work. I would draw your attention to Japan. I draw your attention to Korea, to Taiwan, and indeed to China, and European countries that did strict lockdowns. They were successful in significantly dampening the infection rate and the number of people infected. Keeping the economy open, and there are examples within the United States. In the Midwest, I think this is Nebraska, maybe Kansas. There were two counties not side by side, but they're on opposite sides that say one kept things open, the other shut it down. The one that shut down didn't have infections of any great significance. Their businesses were able to start up and flourish. In the other, the infection rate soared where they didn't shut down. That's a debate that's going on. It'll be a very important lesson for the future. COVID is not the last pandemic. It's one of a long line of pandemics. We've had a pandemic at least once every decade. Fortunately, they were not as virile as this one. But there will be another one coming. So we have lessons to learn here. Now, with regard to the state of California, it'll be studied. Certainly the governor has taken a lot of heat, but he's also stepped up and tried to put in place policies to lessen the infection, to reduce the infection. Was he successful? Probably yes, until the holidays came around. When the holidays came, the infection rate soared immediately. Why? Because too many of us ignored the warnings. Don't gather. Don't sit down with grandma for Thanksgiving. Don't do that. But we did. And the infection soared. And you can take a look at Christmas and New Year's. The same thing is happening now. And I said a moment ago, every human has a significant level of intelligence. And surely all of us possess sufficient intelligence to understand that gathering large group of people, families, in an indoor environment creates infections. We don't need to know that from COVID. For God's sakes, we know that about the common cold. Really? We do. I have a standing order in my office. If you have a cold, you're not coming to work. You're going to work remotely. That's been a standing order as long as I've been in public office. Why do we do that? We know. So let's be smart.
Our next question actually comes from a variety of people in the Q&A and pre-submitted questions. Tons of folks would like to know what's being done to ensure that President-elect Biden, Vice President-elect Harris, former presidents, members of Congress such as yourself, what is being done to ensure their safety on Inauguration Day and beyond?
Following the vote today on impeachment, about 2/3 of the members of Congress hustled out of Washington, D.C., went home. I would expect more than half of that 2/3 do not return to the inaugural for fear. Now, I stayed in Washington, where I am now, and I will attend the inaugural. I can assure you that we are asking questions about the security. I mentioned a moment ago the conversation I had with the head of the National Guard Bureau. That conversation was about the care and feeding of the almost 16,000 National Guard that are now in Washington. There will be a very substantial presence in Washington. The domestic intelligence operations are finally operating at full speed. We know where the domestic terrorists are, and we know who they are. And we have a pretty good fix about where they're going to be over the next few days. There will be very heavy security in Washington, including tactical military vehicles. So if there's, if as we hear that thousands are going to march on Washington with their guns to stop the steal and to stop the inaugural, they will be met with very significant military and police presence. Will we be safe? I believe we will, and I believe the president will also. I will note that in a conversation I had with one of his top 3 lieutenants last night, I said, for God's sakes, do not take the train from Delaware to Washington. Don't do that. I mean, anybody can figure out how to harm that train. So don't do it. And this evening, they canceled that event. And I said also, I would really be very careful. Patty tells me all the time, John, there's nice to and need to. Nice to is something you would be nice to do. Need to is something that you must do. And I shared that philosophy with the gentleman last night. So we will do what we need to do. And what I need to do is to be present, as I was for Trump's inauguration, as a symbol of the peaceful passage of presidential power.
We have several questions as well, sir, in the live Q&A pertaining to reports this night alleging that several members of Congress may have been involved in helping premeditate the storming of the Capitol on January 6th. If people would like to know if the House conducts an investigation and finds out that active sitting members of Congress did aid and abet a riotous mob to stage an insurrection at the Capitol on January 6th, what should be done to those members of Congress to push back if they're found to be involved in that planning?
Rest assured that a very serious investigation is underway about the conduct of our colleagues in Congress. Yes, there have been allegations that members of Congress provided a tour for people that were the next day, that is on the January 5th, a tour of the Capitol. And the next day they were, those guests were part of the riot. What to make of that will be determined. I also have already said that one of my colleagues, and I'll name him, Mo Brooks of Alabama, clearly incited the mob at the presidential rally. I think he should be thrown out of Congress following as soon as we return, which will be on the day of the inaugural. There are others that participated. We need to analyze their work. We have the power to exclude from Congress any member who has engaged in inappropriate activities. Secondly, this entire event, that is the riot, the insurrection, has caused people to look closely at the Constitution. And lo and behold, there's an element in the 14th Amendment that says that anybody that is engaged in an insurrection cannot hold public office. That dates back to the Confederacy, but it is applicable today, which is still in the Constitution. And if it is found that any member of Congress or anybody else who would like to hold office that was involved in that insurrection, found to be guilty of a crime associated with the insurrection, could be barred from holding public office. And the definition of public office, I think, goes from dog catcher to president. So we'll see. That is something that dates back to the Reconstruction period following the Civil War, but it is still there. There are a couple of other laws that have not been used for some time that would be applicable to members of Congress who engage in an insurrection.
Maria and Richard, through the Q&A, would like to know what can be done to rebuild the public health infrastructure that's been decimated throughout the response to COVID-19?
Early on in this pandemic, I think it was in February, there was a group of public health officers who were briefing those of us on the Armed Services Committee, a couple of other committees. And what they briefed us, or what one of them showed us, was the public expenditure on public health, specifically to deal with infections, pandemics, and the like. And every time there is an infection, bird flu, HIV, you name it, there is a significant, actually a doubling or a tripling of money for public health. Within a year of that event, the money diminishes at about a pace that is within 2 to 3 years, the amount of money for public health returns to what it was before that particular pandemic. Now, the question is, are we smart enough to learn from history? There is clear evidence that the answer is no. However, there is a new administration, and there are a few of us that would like to think we have enough smarts to realize that there will be another pandemic. We need to rebuild our public health infrastructure, and we need to maintain it. I will assure you that it would be infinitely is the wrong word, dramatically cheaper than dealing with the cost of an uncontrolled infection. So let's be smart. Let's learn from the past. Let's learn from the mistakes of the past. Clearly, the Trump administration went beyond just the funding issues and really did decimate the public health federal infrastructure.
Our next question comes from Mary in Woodland. Mary wants to basically stated that they're aware of the new challenges that face the new Congress. However, as a California resident, the state and local tax cap, SALT tax cap of $10,000 is punitive because of high property taxes in areas like Yolo County and high income tax areas in California. What are the plans to repeal the SALT deduction cap that was instituted in a recent tax bill?
That was what was called the Trump, looking for the right word here. In 2017, the Republicans and under Trump's leadership passed a massive tax reduction and a massive tax increase for blue states, states that did not support him. New York, California, Pennsylvania, Illinois, states with large populations and large expenses and high taxes. And so that's where the state and local tax deduction was significantly eliminated, or nearly eliminated, but significantly reduced. I think it's maximum to $10,000. At the same time, Trump moved from a high tax state, New York, to a low tax state, Florida, where they have no income tax. Now, what to do about it? In the CARES bill, in the HEROES bill in May, that was the $3 trillion piece of legislation. And the follow-up in September, that was the smaller HEROES bill. And in the December bill, there was, in those two bills, the first two, there was a restoration of the state and local tax deduction. And it was one of the debate points. It was one of the issues that was heavily opposed by the Treasury Department and by the Republican Senate. But it did pass the House. This issue will be taken up. It was not in the smaller December COVID relief bill, but it will be an ongoing issue in the future. It is a heavy, heavy hit for California. And it was specifically designed to punish states that did not vote for Trump. It was really a gross political move. Some states felt good about that. Other states got screwed, and it's an issue that is not going to go away.
Okay, we have time. We've gone a little bit over time, so we'll just wrap here with one final question. That question is from Timothy in Davis. Timothy would like to know, what will you do and what can be done to prevent gun violence in this country?
We're learning two different types of gun violence. We clearly have domestic terrorism in a very significant way in America. It's not new. We've had domestic terrorism before, and some of that, and all of it is the flouting of guns. In some cases, guns have been used. We saw this in Wisconsin, where in one of the riots in Wisconsin, there was violence by one of the terrorist organizations. So we see that from time to time. That's one kind of gun violence. The other is gun violence that exists. What I would like to see is for our nation to have the kind of gun laws that California has. These laws have been in place, some of them dating back until the 1990s. In fact, I introduced in California in 1988 a ban on assault weapons. That's still in effect in California. It's not in the United States. It should be. There are others having to do with other laws that we have worked with, but have not successfully passed. But the California state laws are a very, very good model of efforts to reduce gun violence, to make sure that those people that have guns know how to use them, secure their guns, and are used by people that are not violent, that don't have a criminal history, or involved in spousal abuse, for example. So we'll see where we are. Some of those bills have been introduced. None have been successfully passed in Congress or signed by the president. What will occur in the year ahead remains to be seen. But I would think at a minimum, we will see a expansion of the need to know who is purchasing a gun. This is the prerequisite to purchasing a gun, that the person identify who they are, that they don't have a record, and that information be available to any gun sale. Also, probably restrictions on gun shows requiring, once again, that people that are buying guns have an appropriate background. So that's where we are with it. We'll see what takes place in the new Congress. The Second Amendment will remain in place, but hopefully it'll be used more wisely than it has in the past.
Thank you, sir. We are now almost about 10 minutes over time, so I will just remind everyone, thank them so much for attending tonight's town hall discussion. I'll just remind everyone before the congressman provides some closing remarks that if you weren't able to get your question answered tonight, you can visit the website at garamendi.house.gov. Go to the Contact Me section, and we'll be able to respond as quickly as possible. Also, stay informed, keep up to date with what the congressman's up to by visiting his social media accounts, all under the username @RepGaramendi. You can also subscribe to his newsletter on garamendi.house.gov. With that, Congressman, I'll leave it to you to close out tonight's discussion.
Well, first of all, a big thank you to all of you that participated in tonight's virtual town hall. I would much prefer to be out there with you in public. I love the interaction. I love the energy that comes with good questions, bad questions, tough questions, easy questions. I love that, but that's not where we are. Probably for the next 6 months, maybe a little longer than that. And so we're going to do virtual town halls. So for all of you that took the time to participate, hopefully you learned a few things along the way. I certainly did from your questions. I want to know what you have on your mind. My title is representative. That means I represent you. In order to do that, I need to know what you have on your mind. I need to know what the issues are in my district. I need to be able to, therefore, communicate with you. So take advantage of those remote virtual communication opportunities that exist now. They will continue even when we're able to meet in person. And when we meet in person, I'll look forward to a real live in-person town hall. And we'll look forward to having more town halls in the weeks ahead. We'll do these periodically. I don't mean once every 6 months. I mean several times over the next few months, depending on where we are, what the issues of the day are. So thank you so very much. Look forward to our next one. Keep in touch. Let me know what's on your mind. Thank you and good night.